Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, markets are bracing for results from Nvidia. They come out after the closing bell this afternoon. Stocks are trading near all-time highs ahead of those earnings. Ed Yardeni of Yardeni Research says there is still plenty of money on the sidelines that'll be put to work.
The market has demonstrated not only that it's a bull market, but it's a very supercharged bull market. And I think what's supercharging that is there's still a tremendous amount of liquidity in the financial system. The increase in interest rates encouraged a lot of people to pile into money market mutual funds. So we have a record $6 trillion in money market mutual funds, and $2.5 trillion of that is retail. And as the Fed lowers interest rates, some of that money will pour into the stock market.
Investor Ed Yardeni remains one of the biggest bulls on Wall Street.
Well, as for Nvidia, Nathan, the results could have a huge impact not only on that stock, but the overall market. The options market implies a move of nearly 10% in either direction the day after. We get an earnings preview from Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Wall Street expecting Nvidia to report blowout results for its latest quarter on blockbuster sales of its AI chips, and the big focus, its outlook. Some are expecting revenue growth rising as much as 70% for the current quarter. And despite sufficient demand for its current chip lineup, investors will want to hear the latest on the delayed rollout of its upcoming Blackwell chips. Consensus calls for revenue of $28.86 billion on adjusted earnings of 65 cents a share. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Tom, thanks. And ahead of those results, shares of Nvidia are up 0.5%. After we get the results, join Bloomberg Technology for a half-hour Nvidia special, highlighted by an exclusive interview with CEO Jensen Huang. That's at 6:30 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
We'll be keeping an eye on shares of Bank of America, Karen. They're little change to the downside in early trading, but Warren Buffett is continuing to unload his stake in the U.S.'s second biggest bank. Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway sold an additional $982 million in Bank of America. The conglomerate has trimmed its stake by almost 13% since mid-July, generating $5.4 billion. Berkshire still remains the bank's biggest stockholder with almost 904 million shares, worth $35.9 billion.
Well, Nathan, there's job cuts at Apple. Bloomberg News has learned the iPhone maker took the rare step of cutting about 100 positions in its digital services group. The layoffs included some engineering roles, and the biggest cuts were at the team responsible for the Apple Books app and Apple Bookstore. There were also layoffs in other services teams, including the one that runs Apple News.
And Karen, job cuts may be on the way at HSBC. Bloomberg News has learned Europe's biggest lender is considering plans that would remove layers of middle management. Sources say incoming CEO Georges Elhedry is looking at moves similar to rivals Citigroup and Standard Chartered. Bloomberg's Adam Haig has more from Sydney.
This is the first sign of what we're seeing from the new CEO and really wanting to make his mark early on in terms of the cost control. So what we know at this point is that it's likely to affect middle management roles. So that could include country head type roles in some of its global network. But there's still uncertainty as to how this plays out. And of course, these plans are potentially subject to change, of course, as well.
Bloomberg's Adam Haig says the discussions are the latest sign the bank's looking to rein in costs as rate cuts threaten the margins of global lenders like HSBC.
Well, in other news this morning, Nathan, SpaceX is once again delaying the first ever private spacewalk, this time because of weather. After Tuesday's initial launch was scrubbed for a helium leak, SpaceX says it's standing down from liftoff opportunities today and tomorrow because of an unfavorable forecast in the spacecraft's splashdown area off the coast of Florida. SpaceX says teams will continue to monitor weather for better conditions. If it gets off the ground, Polaris Dawn is in for a 15 to 20-minute spacewalk by 2 of the 4 private astronauts on board.
Back on Earth, Karen, the U.S. Special Counsel investigating Donald Trump for election interference is pressing ahead. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons has the latest.
Special counsel Jack Smith is not giving up on his prosecution of Donald Trump, even though he faced a setback this summer before the Supreme Court. He's filed an updated indictment following the court's ruling that Trump was at least partially immune from prosecution related to his official acts as president. The new indictment removes allegations related to Trump's communications with government officials at the Department of Justice during his presidency, but it keeps intact the same 4 charges against Trump, which include accusations of conspiring to overturn election results. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Nancy, thank you. Now let's get to the latest on geopolitics. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is meeting for a second day with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in the outskirts of Beijing. Bloomberg's Jill Desis is in Hong Kong and says the two leaders have a full plate.
The U.S. obviously feels very strongly about China's involvement and backing of Russian forces fighting the war in Ukraine. You also have a lot of concerns over semiconductors and tariffs and other punitive measures that the U.S. and its allies have taken on a lot of Chinese projects. Just this week, we had Canada, U.S. ally, implement some new tariffs on Chinese EVs. That's certainly on the agenda. And then you also have a lot of concerns around military actions within the South China Sea. That's something that likely the U.S. is going to be bringing up here. Also, any issues surrounding Taiwan, which, of course, China claims as its own territory, even though it operates independently. So we're really just running the gamut.
And Bloomberg's Jill Desis reports Sullivan is hoping to make clear to the foreign minister that he is not speaking for the next administration.
And speaking of whatever the next administration may be, Karen, Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz are getting back on the campaign trail today, kicking off a 2-day bus tour through the battleground state of Georgia. While there, Harris will give her first interview since becoming a candidate. She has agreed to appear on CNN tomorrow night. Republican running mate J.D. Vance was on the campaign trail in Michigan, and he criticized Harris's convention speech.
I think her tone is ridiculous in her speech. There are extremely serious consequences to voting for Donald Trump. I don't think that's persuasive to most Americans, and warning them about voting for the wrong person is just, I think it's ridiculous.
Republicans J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have been pressuring Harris to do more unscripted events. Tomorrow night's interview with Harris and Tim Walz will air on CNN at 9 p.m. tomorrow, Wall Street time.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. A horrifying story after a couple in their 50s was kidnapped and assaulted while house hunting in Danbury, Connecticut. Authorities say their Lamborghini was intentionally rear-ended by a van. 6 men said to be from Florida attacked the couple and forced them into the van. A witness alerted police and pursued the van until it crashed, leading to the couple's rescue. All 6 suspects were caught. Sergeant Stephen Castrovinci is with the Danbury Police.
We've did a lot of background work on them, but at this time it doesn't seem that they have any connections to the Northeast. They're all Miami, Florida guys.
All 6 face multiple charges, including assault and kidnapping. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will present a plan to force Russia to halt its invasion of his country to President Joe Biden just weeks before the U.S. holds November elections. Zelensky says that he wants to discuss the blueprint with Biden during his trip to the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York in September. Zelensky also says he will present it to presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Personal injury attorney Tom Girardi, who gained notoriety when his wife, Erica, appeared on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, has been found guilty of embezzling $15 million from his clients. The prominent Los Angeles attorney was a key figure in helping secure a settlement that later became the storyline to the movie Erin Brockovich. U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada.
His insatiable appetite for money is what led him to court and what led to this verdict today.
Kimberly Archie, who once worked as a legal consultant for Girardi's firm, spoke after the verdict.
I actually believed at one point that Tom Girardi was a decent human being, that he was a hero. You know what they say about meeting your heroes, right? I'm going to disappoint you.
Girardi's sentencing is set for December 6th. We're learning police in Nassau County made their first arrest under a new local law banning face masks In the announcement yesterday, officers responded to reports of a suspicious person on a street near the Levittown and Hicksville town line Sunday night. Authorities say 18-year-old Wesleyan Omar Ramirez Castillo was wearing black clothing and a black ski mask that covered most of his face and displayed other suspicious behavior. Police say that Ramirez Castillo was carrying a 14-inch knife. He was arrested without incident. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Mets road trip continuing at Arizona. Another hot team like San Diego, who the Mets just split with. Mets took the opener 8-3. Pete Alonso, 2-run homer, second inning. Mets then put it away with 6 in the fifth. 10th win for Sean Manaea. Took a shutout to the 7th inning. He struck out 11. Atlanta won at Minnesota to remain 3 games ahead of the Mets. The Yankee lead, AL East, trimmed to a game. Baltimore beat the Dodgers after the Yankees lost in Washington 4-2, shut out until the 8th inning. Failed to score against the Nats' Patrick Corbin, who came in 3-12. Garrett Cole served up a couple of solo home runs, and the Yanks committed 4 errors. Here's Aaron Judge.
You can't do that if you expect to win ball games. You know, we had a chance there at the end, a couple chances last 2 innings to come back and maybe win it and sneak that one out, but, you know, couldn't come away with it. But, you know, I think we had, I don't know if it was 3 or 4 errors on the night, but anytime something like that happens, it's tough to win a ball game.
Judge came up 8th inning with the bases loaded, no one out, hit into a double play. Red Sox beat Toronto 6-3. Kansas City won 6-1 at Cleveland. The surprising Royals have won 10 of the last 13. They've moved into a tie for first. AL Central, the Guardians have been in first almost all season. Prime time at the U.S. Open, Carlos Alcaraz in what figured to be an easy one. Australia's Lee Tu, a qualifier, had only played in 1 Grand Slam match ever, and yet he took the second set. Alcaraz did win in 4. An outer court match between Daniel Evans and Karen Khachanov. Evans won in 5 sets. All 5 took more than an hour. The match took a U.S. Open record 5 hours and 35 minutes. The Giants cut Isaiah Hodgkins. He played a big role a couple years ago, had over 100 receiving yards in the playoff win at Minnesota. Another wideout, Kadarius Toney, cut by the Chiefs. Giants gave up on Toney the year after they drafted him in the first round. He did have some big plays in Kansas City's Super Bowl win. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. Well, if you're listening to us in Boston, our new home starting September 3rd will be 92.9 FM. That's the day right after Labor Day. Bloomberg Radio moving to 92.9 FM in Boston.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. The earnings that investors have been awaiting for weeks are now hours away. Nvidia opens its second quarter books after today's closing bell with another high bar to clear to show the AI spending boom still has momentum. Joining us ahead of Nvidia this morning, Bloomberg TV and radio anchor Kriti Gupta. Kriti, good morning. It seems like investors have gotten used to blowout earnings quarter after quarter for Nvidia. So how high is the bar this time, and what will the reaction be if Nvidia doesn't meet it?
Well, it's a blessing and a curse to be an A-plus student, and I think that's the big issue here with NVIDIA, because to your point, it has been a win after win. But this is, I think, the first time we're actually seeing more nerves than I've seen in the last couple of quarters around it. And let me just put this into some perspective here in terms of some of the numbers that they are expecting when it comes to estimates for the second quarter. The revenue estimate right now is about just shy of $29 billion for the second quarter. So that's the number that they have to beat, with the third quarter kind of forward guidance being at about just shy of $32 billion. So those are the numbers that NVIDIA has to beat from a revenue perspective. Anything short of that would signal some sort of slowdown in the underlying AI demand, not just from kind of the broad tech space, but a lot of it coming from the hyperscalers. So you're what they're calling kind of the big tech companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, the ones that have been trying to really invest in a really big way in AI while also getting their own in-house operations up to par when it comes to AI. So it's kind of been a little bit of a liquidity transfer. Basically, the richest companies in the States and arguably in the world spending in a really big way to NVIDIA, to the point that makes NVIDIA's bottom line over 50% of it coming from just a handful of those Mag 7 names. So that's kind of, I think, the bar, or I think what's at stake here when it comes to these earnings today.
So when we do have a lot of companies doing a lot more in-house development of these kinds of chips that Nvidia up to this point has been the only game in town providing, could we see more color from Nvidia on whether it's concerned at all about losing some market share?
So this was one of the concerns going into after the last quarter, which was this idea of diversification. Because so much of their money or so much of their customer base comes from really just a handful of big names, the question here is, how do they make it a bigger thing? For example, is AI something that just kind of the nerdiest of the nerdy can really use, or is this something that can see broader adoption in other sectors, like in infrastructure, in renewables, in industrials, even in medical things like medical equipment? And that was the case that Jensen Huang was trying to make in the last quarter, was that this is just the beginning. This is just tech getting on board with AI. The applications go much farther. When it comes to the near-term picture, to answer your question, Nathan, specifically for today, a lot of investors are going to be looking for the update on the Blackwell chip. And the way to think about some of the chips that NVIDIA puts out when it comes to gaming or data centers is, I would compare it to the likes of kind of getting a new iPhone from Apple, and that they have this design cycle, this innovation cycle, where they're releasing a new version every year, every 2 years that is cutting edge, etc. The problem is Blackwell, which is their latest product, is expected to have some delays. So one of the pieces of commentary that a lot of folks are going to be sensitive to is, what do the delays look like? Does it impact future projects? And does it signal kind of these capacity constraint or any sort of supply chain constraint when it comes to getting the AI delivered to some of their customers?
Just 30 seconds left. We're going to be getting some more commentary from NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang on a Bloomberg Technology special this evening. If you were Ed Ludlow this evening, what would you be asking Jensen Huang?
Well, knowing Ed Ludlow, I bet his first on monetization and what that pricing looks like, because that's going to be the game changer here. They've developed the technology, they've marketed the technology. How much money can you make on the technology? I bet that would be a top of line for Ed.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.